Welcome to the Generous Business Owner Podcast, where business owners gain inspiration and encouragement to live a legacy, not just leave one. And now your hosts, Jeff Thomas, Alan Barnhart, and Jeff Rutt.
Welcome, everybody, to this week's Generous Business Owner Podcast. My name is Jeff Thomas, and we've got a very special guest with us this week. His name is David Lewis. He's the founder of Energy Capital Vietnam. Yes, I said Vietnam. And he has had a career in the military and the government that's kind of led him to this point. Very interesting story. Thanks for being with us today, David.
Jeff, thanks for having me. It's an honor to be here.
It's going to be a lot of fun hearing your story. No two stories are the same, but some are a little more different than others. And I think yours falls into that category. Your career path is a one of one. So, but we always like a little context, David, as you know. So tell us about growing up. What were your parents like? Was there a faith journey? Was there some entrepreneurial stuff happening? Siblings? Give us kind of the picture of David as a kid.
Sure. So, look, I'm a Texas native, sixth generation Texan. I grew up here in Houston, and great family background, a lot of support, and in all honesty, faith has always been a part of my life for as long as I can remember. I don't remember not being, in church or around the Word of God. I just feel like it's been something I've known my whole life. So it's just integral, in my upbringing. And that being said, I would not say that my life is picture perfect or rosy. Not at all. There's plenty of challenges and difficulties, but the continuity has always been a desire to want to improve, a desire to want to honor my family, and then ultimately, that manifests itself in okay, I got to figure out how to honor God. Yeah.
And what were your parents like? What they do for a living?
My mom is a teacher, and my dad worked in the oil and gas industry. Is a landman and management of oil and gas rights. So kind of always surrounded by the oil and gas industry.
Yeah. Okay.
And my grandfather was a big influence in my life as well. My mother's father, he was a rancher. My family roots are, ranching, farming, and teaching to the core. That's kind of most of my family. That's where I come from.
Everybody listening who doesn't live in Texas is wondering right now whether you own a horse. I mean, isn't the question everybody asks us Texans is, so
I no longer do.
Did you at one time in your life own a horse?
Through my grandfather, there were, he owned them. Growing up, I did have horses that were, my preferred horse that I was allowed to saddle up and I would use when we go out and gather cattle.
That counts.
Okay. Well, then, yes, I've had horses.
You had a horse and you rode one as a kid. Okay. So
yes, absolutely.
We're upholding the stereotype effectively.
Oh, I'm a walking Texas stereotype.
Okay. And it doesn't get any better. We just keep going with it for college. So, for all the Aggies out there,
undergrad Texas A&M, and a big part of that was the Corps Cadets that they have, and I joined the Corps Cadets. I was attracted to the opportunity for attending a university, but also that had military connections. Because my grandfather was a naval aviator during World War II. He didn't deploy. He did shore patrols domestically, but it inspired me, to want to serve. And so, the Corps Cadets pulled me to A&M, and ultimately from that I took a Marine contract and was commissioned in the Marine Corps when I graduated in 2001.
And how many years did you spend in the Marine Corps?
Right around 5 years. So I was commissioned in August of 2001. And then, and I got out of the Marines in February of 2006. So right about 5 years.
And what was your primary job description?
MOS, military operations specialty. I was an infantry officer. Okay. So we're the guys with the guns, that run around on the ground, and we call them crunchies.
Did you get
Grunts.
that's funny. That's perfect. That's perfect. Did you get deployed anywhere? Did you travel a lot? What was
Yeah, so I was with First Battalion, Fourth Marines with the First Marine Regiment in Camp Pendleton, California, on the West Coast, and I did 2 deployments to Iraq in 2003 as part of the initial invasion, and then we redeployed in '04 as part of the 11th MU, which is the Marine Expeditionary Unit, Special Operations Capable, and we did Iraq. I did Iraq the summers of '03 and '04. For fun. I'm kidding, but no, it was
Everybody wants to
Iraq
go
was
to
my
Iraq for
experience.
the summer. Let's be honest.
Right? Yeah, yeah. That was something. I tell you what. Whenever there was the summer of '03, I remember very clearly. There was even a heat wave happening in Iraq, to where the index got up to the 140s.
Oh my
Like, and
gosh.
it was
Things are melting.
otherworldly. Yes, like, yeah, when you're walking around and just feels like you're in an oven, your face, it just is like another level of misery. You're like, okay, this is, uncomfortable. But
Well, listen,
uh
thank you for your service, man. That's really
oh,
just
it was honored to serve. Honored to serve.
just
Yeah.
it's one of the things I just love about this country is it draws amazing people like you to do that. So for the rest of us. So all right, now
Well, I
you
want
get
to
out.
say, I want to say real quick, sorry, just because you
Yeah, no,
mentioned
go
that, I want
ahead.
to say what I love the most about the Marines was exactly what you said, which is, I was inspired by the people I served with. I'll tell you a real quick story.
Yeah.
On my first deployment, my first platoon, I was a weapons platoon commander, so I was in charge of the our mortars and assaultmen and machine gunners. And in one machine gun section, I had a kid who's a former gangbanger from LA who wanted to clean his life up, join the Marines. And his partner was from Middletown, USA, from Indiana. And he was homeschooled and so sheltered that he didn't know who Arnold Schwarzenegger was. This is in 2002. And so that gives you a juxtaposition
Yeah.
between the two. And here they were working together as one synchronous unit. And that I've always been so inspired by that dynamic, because it literally is the best of our country, from opposite ends of the spectrum coming together in service, for a greater good. So that's something I just want to say as a shout out to, all my fellow veterans, but all the people that are still serving or people that are interested. It's the best decision you can make, but you got to do it for yourself. Each one has their own story. But it was an honor to serve. That's what I mean that.
No, it's just it's amazing. I was just reading this morning about a an immigrant who came from Haiti to the United States, and when he was 11 years old, his I think they've had so many natural disasters there, but an earthquake had happened, and the U.S. military had gone in to help. And he said he remembered asking his father, "Who are those guys in the green uniforms?" And he's like, "That's the American military." And he's like, "I want to be one of them one day." And then I just saw a picture of him graduating from West Point,
Wow.
and it's
Yeah.
just, I mean, only in this country,
Yeah.
that kind of thing gives me goosebumps. So
Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
just that in really, that really put you on an interesting course that maybe you wouldn't have been on otherwise. I guess that's always true, but some
Yeah.
stepping stones are a little more direct maybe than others. So tell us about where you went after you got out of the military.
No, that's very true, Jeff. So growing up, here in Texas, I knew I wanted to serve my country, and I chose a path that was right for me, that I felt was giving me challenges, and I tell you today, I'd say this with all love and respect to my university that I love. I feel like everything I learned from the Marine Corps. And so it was very, very influential in my life in terms of lesson learned. It's going to open my eyes up about how the world works and what's going on. But specifically, my time in Iraq is where it taught me the importance of energy security. Because we're very much, all the pre-invasion briefings were about, spreading freedom and democracy, which is true. But shortly after, the Baghdad fell, we were tasked with securing a large oil storage depot site south of Baghdad. And it reminded me a lot of my childhood growing up. My grandfather's ranch out in, West Texas, eastern New Mexico, where there's, big, huge, oil storage tanks everywhere. And I realized, like, okay, you know, probably a lot of places in the world could use freedom and democracy. we came into Iraq because our country cares about energy security. And so it just changed the whole perspective about, what's happening overall. And it gave me a newfound appreciation for this industry that I grew up surrounded by, that I took for granted and I thought was kind of sleepy and, not important. And it all of a sudden elevated it in a whole new sense for me. And I thought about the people in my life who I knew were in it. And I was like, wow, that's a whole different way in which you can make a positive impact in the world, through commercial means. So it also elevated the role of private sector for me. And so I got out of the Marines, and I still had a heart for service, and I ended up working on Capitol Hill in the Senate for Senator Kay Bailey Hutchison, and I wanted to be an advocate for the positive things that were happening in Iraq that weren't getting reported in the news. And I was lucky enough to find a home in her office, and so and I didn't have any, my only goal was simply I felt that the media wasn't being fair in portraying what was happening in Iraq. And I thought that a lot of the things that were going on, it just wasn't fairly representing the truth of the ground, the truth of what was happening on the ground. It was kind of more politically driven, and I didn't like that. So I wanted to be a counter to that, to that dynamic altogether, because they were debating at that time in the summer of 06, they were debating setting a timeline for early troop withdrawal. And I thought that was a mistake. And so, like I said, I got hired in her office, and I was fortunate there. And then ultimately, she ended up gave a floor speech, or she gave a speech on the floor of the Senate, arguing against why you can't set a timeline for troop withdrawal. And she, used me as kind of a prop or an example, for that, and which I was, happy, honored to do. But the lesson from that I learned, I was like, wow, that's probably the pinnacle of the influence I can have as a staffer. But I was still learning so much, and the Hill is so exciting, and so I continued working in the office because it was so educational. And really, what I learned working, in DC on the Hill, is just the reality of the nature of money, power, and politics, and how it's interconnected. And I don't say that as a good thing or a bad thing. It's just the truth. And so it changed my perspective on the importance of money in the private sector and business and what it means, because ultimately it has a big influence on policy, and policy was a lot of things that I thought a lot about and cared about. And so it put me on a pathway where I wanted to go in the private sector and find an industry and a business where I could work towards something that fit within my larger worldview, and could hopefully be successful, so that I can continue contributing towards the way the whole dynamic there between the way policies develop. So that put me on a pathway ultimately to get in the oil and gas business, because a longtime family friend and mentor, basically recruited me. This is 2008. He was starting up a new company focused on onshore development in Texas, with his son, who was my best friend from growing up, and invited me to be part of it. And I thought, hey, this is perfect. We can start up a company focused on drilling oil and gas wells in Texas, and every barrel we can produce domestically is a barrel we don't import. This goes back to my lessons learned in Iraq about energy security. So I was excited. And so in 08, moved back to Texas and jumped in with both feet. We started a company, just focused on onshore redevelopment of legacy fields in Texas.
And how did that business turn out?
So I would say it was very educational. We had periods of success, but also difficulties, and challenges that were very educational. And specifically, I'll give you a real quick example. This is the very early days of the shale revolution, and had no way to appreciate how impactful that was going to be in terms of the whole world. And our business model was focused on redevelopment of legacy fields and vertical wells, and not taking the additional capital expenditure for horizontals, and because they have high depletion rates, which is all true. But I think it taught me the importance of what does the market want, and go with the market, because the market was very hungry for developing shale, And ultimately, obviously, it changed the world. So it was just educational in the sense of, you need to be able to take constant feedback from what's being provided and bake that into your calculus, and what you're doing and how you're doing it, and how you're executing. And honestly, that was really just kind of a repeat of lessons learned in the military. There's a philosophy that you learn in the military that called the OODA Loop, observe, orient, decide, act. It was originally developed by Air Force fighter pilots back in the 60s.
Okay, do that again. I want to write that down.
Yeah.
What's the acronym?
Sure, it's a OODA Loop, OODA loop, and that's observe, orient, decide, act.
Love it.
And the concept is it's a continuous cycle of taking information in, processing the information, and then adjusting your course of what you're doing.
Yeah.
And so that's really, in the Marine Corps, that's the fundamental behind maneuver warfare, right? That's the whole kind of philosophical principle behind it. And that's why I mentioned earlier about lessons learned. I feel like I've applied that same philosophy in the business world for myself and our company. What we're doing is I've never stopped being, that Marine infantry officer, applying the fundamentals of OODA Loop into my business actions to constantly take in information and make course corrections along the way.
Exactly.
I think this is popularly known in the tech world as fail fast. Same concept. It's the exact same concept. And it's basically, don't get too married, to an idea.
The one path. We got to stay on the one path. If all the data is telling you get off that path, you ought to pivot.
Yeah. So just and it's a balance. It's a constant balance between, how can you be focused and execute, but yet stay resilient and make course adjustments along the way, that can allow you to pick up tailwinds and draft behind, market movements.
Okay. For all of our non-oil and gas people, okay, can you give a 1 minute plain English description of, it doesn't have to be 1 minute, but the shale revolution? I'm not sure people understand. I mean, we were reading books prior, to 2008, right? About how Saudi Arabia was lying about their reserves. There wasn't enough oil, and prices were going to go through the roof. And remember, we were totally dependent on Saudi and all of these things. I'm not sure the sort of fracking revolution has gotten its due in terms of the change it's had economically and the energy security. You keep talking about the importance of energy security, the massive energy. How would you maybe just kind of describe what fracking is, and then your take on that revolution?
Well, disclaimer, I'm not the qualified person to say this, but in humble, deference to George Mitchell, fellow Aggie,
right,
and entrepreneur who pioneered, the fracking space, which, by the way, he did against the advice of everyone around him. Every single person told him it was a bad idea and don't do it, and he was just too stubborn and hard-headed to quit and give up, and he changed the world. And Jeff, to your point, it's not just making, the U.S. energy independent, but it's the second and third order effects of what that means.
Yes.
For the business community, massive wealth creation in terms of, mineral interest owners and industry, et cetera. But as a veteran, as a veteran of Iraq and a military, member, look at what's happened in the past 2 years with Russia invading Ukraine in Europe. Okay. If this had happened 20 years ago, I don't know that it would have been possible for the U.S. to not get directly involved immediately.
Such a
good
point. Nobody talks about that. I haven't heard one person talk about that.
It's huge. And so if you look at in terms of the second and third order effect, so this is fall under a third order effect of the U.S. being energy independent. We moved a grand total of 0 troops. I'm thinking officially, I'm not talking about volunteer people. We have 0 troops, 0 blood loss. We have not gotten involved at all.
Yes.
But yet we have dealt body blow after body blow after body blow to Putin, and the Russian military, purely through the commercial means of providing Europe an alternative source of energy. This is huge. And so if you think about what is the cost savings, I mean, it's massive. It's absolutely massive. So when I go back to the fundamentals about how important energy security is, the simplest thing is it keeps the lights on, right? Just the economic, health of a country. But the second, the follow-on effects are huge. So you are correct. I feel like, unfortunately, shortly after the shale revolution happened, there became this kind of like obsession about energy transition, and then these
Yep.
purists took this mindset of trying to throw, lump all fossils in the same category and throw it under the bus and say, well, we got to rush to this direction, and we skip past the reality, which is, if it wasn't for, the shale fracking companies, there would have been a lot more loss of treasure, loss of blood, and a lot more pain, and not just in this country, but around the world. So it's been a savior, and I just think that we should double down and stay focused on how we can use these same dynamics and principles of energy security and in the national power paradigm. And so that's what brought me to Iraq. Is as the shale revolution was unfolding, and I saw our country on its way to becoming energy dependent. My original motivation and drive for getting in the upstream industry, began changing a little bit, because now I saw like, hey, well, we're going to be energy independent, and so the calculus changed somewhat. And then, through uncorrelated events, I was pulled into Vietnam through the embassy, and it was the Vietnamese that invited me to explore oil and gas opportunities in Vietnam. And whenever I went there, I was blown away at how pro-American they are. That's the first thing. Was
I mean,
like, wow,
just
yeah,
when we first had a conversation, when we were first introduced, and I saw that you were doing this in Vietnam. I mean, I have a brother-in-law that lives in Vietnam. He's lived there for the last 7 or 8 years. I've been over there 6 or 7 times, and that was one of my first surprise impressions as an American. I thought, oh boy, maybe they hate us. We came
right,
over there, kind of lost the
right,
war,
right,
uh, and I didn't know. I thought, frankly, this country has a pretty negative view of that war as a memory.
yep,
So I
yep,
just was projecting my American
yep,
worldview kind of on them, and I was
hmm,
pleasantly surprised that by and large most Vietnamese were embraced
yeah,
Americans and saw us
yes,
as a source of opportunity and capital
yeah,
and partnership and all of that.
yeah.
Has that been your experience?
You to a T. You absolutely nailed it. It's one of the most humbling things I've experienced. Was being introduced to the Vietnamese community in Vietnam, the environment, and the whole ecosystem, and how pro-American they are. 91% approval rating. Jeff, they love us more than we love ourselves. And given
Wow.
the history, of our countries, it's especially humbling. And you know how what resonated with me, and honestly, it resonated at such a deep level. I didn't even realize it till 3 years later. But subconsciously, what I was asking myself was, how long will it take before the Iraqis will ever love us as much as the Vietnamese do? Because what I saw in Vietnam was
Wow.
50 years after the war, they love America, and they're inviting us to come in, bring investment, help them develop their country. And I had this kind of like, epiphanal vision of, look, we have an ability to leave the bullets and band-aids at home. Let's just bring the beans, and using the soft power hard currency to invest in the country, and we can still have a positive influence, in terms of how the overall development of the country, goes forward. And I saw a perfect alignment, between, the dynamics of US policy with Vietnamese policy, because at the end of the day, we also recognized was, hey, every dollar of investment we can bring in to Vietnam, that's a dollar that we could displace of Russian or Chinese influence. And this is in 2015, right? So this is before, we really viewed Russia or China as a big threat that we currently, we view. But still the fundamental kind of Team USA dynamics. I was like, hey, let's try to get there. I would prefer American companies, American
Right.
business have more influence, in a foreign land than others. So I was more just like, hey, let's promote red, white, and blue. Let's promote Team USA, and recognizing that oil's fungible, and they have a lot of undiscovered or recently discovered reserves. So I was like, hey, let's pull them into our dynamic of energy security. Let's have alignment here. I
Okay.
was still thinking around the idea of, let's align friends in terms of reserves, because we want to build mutual energy security. They need it, and we have it, but let's build friends while we can. That was kind of the whole backdrop.
Okay. I mean, this is a fascinating story because, all right, military career, go to DC, Okay. Get out, do oil and gas stuff, and somehow connect the dots here between your oil and gas deal. And then, I mean, obviously you've got that experience in the government and that sort of thing.
Yeah.
How does that Vietnam connection happen?
I had invested into a company based in DC. It was actually a clean water technology company based in DC. And the embassy, the Vietnamese embassy, held a salon, and they saw applications in agribusiness, fish farming, shrimp farming, rice farming. And so I was going back to DC to kind of help, because this is a small business, and I was going to help them plan for this. So that's how it happened. It was the embassy personnel that recognized my background from the military, from the Hill, from being in oil and gas, and they were having this, their big neighbor breathing on their neck, trying to move rigs in offshore to prevent their ability to develop reserves. They're looking for friends in the industry. But guess what happened in 2014? Oil price crashed.
Right.
In November 2014 is when we had the first big oil price crash. So right whenever Vietnam was looking for friends in the industry is pulling its horns in. And that's how, the door opened up. And I was invited to explore these opportunities, and I didn't know what to expect. And whenever I went over the first time and I sat down with the chairman of one of their state-owned companies, they talked about their desire to privatize the energy sector. It caught my attention. And the first question I asked Jeff was, "Why are you talking to me? This doesn't make any sense. There's so many big companies out there." I was like, this doesn't make any sense. So I knew, being an entrepreneur, I was like, okay, well, there's something not getting served in the market. I don't know what's happening, but something's not, is not fitting. Otherwise, I wouldn't be having this conversation. So I would, the only thing I'll take credit for was I had the awareness to recognize, okay, there's something here, there's a need, because everything I've done has been either, by their suggestion, their request, their invitation. Every single step I've made along the way has been the Vietnamese, kind of leading the pathway. What I've done is I just simply sat down and listened. I treated them with respect. And my mindset from the beginning was, listen, I'm a guest in your country. I'm not here to tell you what to do or how to do it. I'm here to understand, what do you need and how can I help? And I made it clear we have to follow US law and follow Vietnamese law. And for us to raise capital for anything, we have to control the asset. And that kind of began this multi-year journey of learning about, Vietnamese culture and industry and how everything's worked. And it kind of, what I saw in Vietnam was tremendous opportunity for building out infrastructure that reminded me of the way perhaps our country was a century earlier. In the late 1800s, early 1900s, the robber barons, of the U.S., laying the railroads, building out so much of the foundational infrastructure that we use today. That's what I saw was really going to be happening in Vietnam. And I thought, wow, this is incredible. So the business opportunity was just very obvious. It was just like, okay, well, how can you be successful? And I knew that the most important questions that were going to be asked, and the most important conversations that were going to be held in behind closed doors and meetings that I would never be in.
Right.
So the only way I would ever be able to be successful is by being as open and transparent as possible, and just speaking honestly and truthfully about what we can do, what we can't do, and seeing where it led us, and focusing on trying to build relationships based on trust.
And these are big projects, so it takes a long time.
Yes, it does.
I mean, not only do you, I mean, these are infrastructure projects that take years in America, okay?
Right.
Let alone in a place where you don't really have access to the politics in the same way or the process. So describe for the listener who what these projects are that you're working on.
Sure. So, simplistically, from day one, we've been focused on energy security in Vietnam. And the concept is, securing licenses for energy and infrastructure projects that help promote energy security. And so in Vietnam, that's defined by, there's a huge power deficit, and the baseload supply for power, comes from LNG, liquefied natural gas. So it's about controlling import terminals and storage depots and distribution systems for the import and storage distribution of liquefied natural gas, of LPG, liquefied petroleum gas, and refined petroleum products. It's about just the overall recognizing, the macro picture of how the world works in terms of energy. 80% comes from fossil. Not all fossils create equal. And natural gas has 40% the emissions of coal. But when you look at petroleum and petroleum products, it's a huge component of everything that we do and consume, including all of the iPads, and you pick the Teslas have a ton of hydrocarbons in them as well. So that's just reality.
So okay, now these are huge projects. So just to get the licenses, I mean, where are you in the process to be able to kind of start building these things?
So we are submitting for our first license this month, and it's for a port project for energy storage and container cargo, and we anticipate the license getting issued in the next 6 months, probably around September. And that'll be the first license project. The other ones were, integrated LNG power projects. So this is, large scale power sell to the grid with an import terminal for bringing fuel. And part of the reason for those delays were the government was kind of doing a massive revision of their overall master plan on power, where previously it was plans for coal, and they wanted to have cleaner fuel, so moving away from coal to natural gas or renewables. But at the same time, they're dealing with the calculus of importing fuel. So now they have to deal with, commodity prices outside their control, because it's not just the domestic consumption of natural gas where they can control the price, but instead, international pricing. These are all dynamics that were completely foreign to the system. And how do they manage these things? Well, being an upstream guy, this is what we brought to the table. And what we understood was how you can use contract structuring, based off of Henry Hub, getting hedges and long-term buying contracts to to manage volatility in commodity prices in order to smooth out the pricing ability to have stable source of power. And what I want to say is Vietnam was not alone in this. The reality is this is all of Asia.
Yes.
Because what you experienced in 2020, the spot price of LNG was below $2 or $3 an MBTU, which is not sustainable. That's just ridiculously low. Yeah. But because the spot price is so low, Asian buyers were not wanting to buy long-term contracts from the US because the long-term contracts were above the spot price. And the Asian buyers were saying, well, why do I want to pay more for something when I can get it cheaper right now on the spot market? Well, if you're from the oil and gas industry in Texas, the first thing you know about oil and gas prices is what goes up can come down, which means whatever's down can go up. So that whole, what you're paying for is security of supply, security of pricing. And so it took Russia invading Ukraine, LNG prices spiking, for all of Asia to wake up and say, whoa, now I see the value of long-term contracts. We want stable prices. You're putting a ceiling on the cost of my fuel, right? But I'm saying if you're from Texas, right, you understand this in your bones.
Right. As I say, the cure for high prices, high prices. Cure for low prices. I mean, they're gonna. But
right.
All right. So without getting too technical here, now maybe let's turn it into this. Now this could turn into a huge project. You could be on the other side, on kind of leading the American side of these huge projects. You'll get big manufacturing companies. So like, who would be the kind of person that would build these assets?
Yeah. So, and to be clear, there's multiple projects that we're in the middle of developing. We've signed a total of 10 MOUs the past year, for various size projects. But what you're looking, our business model is, we secure the license, we partner with strategic partners, and then we reserve a portion of bringing in, institutional capital thereafter, which is de-risked. So let's take the project. Let's say it's integrated LNG power. You're going to have your OEM suppliers of turbine engines, which of this size there's 3. It's Siemens, GE, and Mitsubishi. They want to sell turbines, and they're willing to put dollars in the deal in order to get the turbine sold, so they're using their turbine. Power plant operating companies, which there's plenty, in Asia, America, we're not going to really get involved over there, but a lot of Asian companies would like to be, involved in operating power plant companies. And then you have the terminal side. So there's U.S. companies that are involved in operating terminals and FSRUs, and there's Asian, the companies around the world that they want to control the choke point of the import of fuel and the storage of fuel. And then you have companies that are involved who specialize in the management of moving the fuel. These are trading companies. that move the fuel around, and then you have the supplier. So there's kind of, I mean, it's like it's a wide variety of potential strategic partners, knowing where they all are, and our job is to paint the picture and explain, hey, listen, this is how this project is beneficial to your business and what you're doing, and getting involved, is accretive to your original business model. And you pull them in, and they take an interest in the project, and then we reserve, like I said, a portion for institutional investment later on, once all the everything's been de-risked in terms of the offtake contracts.
Got it. So you're kind of the middleman who's cutting the deal, doing the politicking, you gets the permits, if you will, and then you bring in the partner and orchestrate this thing. This is a multi-year, probably multi-decade by the time you're done with it, project. And of course, this is the Generous Business Owner podcast. So maybe let's pivot a little bit to your story about your plans. Should this all transpire exactly or even partially the way you envision it, obviously this could be a very lucrative thing. And of course, we have a lot of people on the podcast who have already had exits, and they tell all of their stories of the highs and lows along the way, and kind of how they try to use that platform at some point for generosity and to honor God. We're catching you a little earlier in the story. The story is being written as we're having this conversation. And I guess that big liquidity event, all those are hopefully in the future for you. But what really caught my attention when we were talking before was the way you're thinking about your stewardship responsibility, who owns it, that kind of thing. Will you mind sharing that story about how do you think about preparing for something that might be very lucrative?
Well, look, the reason why this has been kind of foundational from the very beginning is everything about, this business venture and what I'm doing. It's very simple. It's crazy. It's completely crazy. There's a grand total of 0 people that thought that this was a good idea whenever I started the company in 2015. Nobody thought it was a good idea. But there was something inside. I felt compelled, like, no, this makes sense. This is, just made a lot of sense to me. And whenever I would sit down and talk to people, about Vietnam, Vietnam was a place too far. So I couldn't recruit anyone successful. And I was, I was having coffee with my pastor, and I was sharing about, these frustrations and how I believe it's a great opportunity, but I can't do it alone. And we talked and prayed, but by the time I got home, in less than 10 minutes, I felt like I had this epiphany where, like, he was like, hey, you bozo, God's your partner. And I was like, oh, okay. Well, then I realized, I kind of opened my eyes up a little bit, about everything. And I thought, okay, well, I just sat down and, wrote out a contract, and was like, all right, we're partners, God, and here you go, and sign it, and brought it to my pastor and asked him to sign it. He kept the copy and I kept the copy. But the reason I'm saying that is I did that not for anybody else, I did it for myself, because I was convinced that if this is going to work, it's only going to be but through the hand of God that it happens. And I can't even begin to tell you the number of anecdotes and little stories along the way that just reinforce that same point over and over and over again. So all I can say is it's baked in the foundation of the kind of vision behind this. What we saw was, it's really something that that's designed to honor God and whatever His plan is, which I don't know. I'm just trying to walk the path that I think I'm supposed to walk. And the hardest part is praying about that and understanding, is this the right path? And is this the way I'm supposed to go, or am I being foolhardy and kind of going the wrong direction? But all of that comes from, Jeff, my background from the military and what I went through, in Iraq, where I felt an overwhelming blessing and sense that I've been given an incredible gift, from God that I couldn't take for granted. So that's really the heart of all this.
Yeah. So I just love this physical act. It's one thing to kind of get that still small voice or even lightning bolt that, hey, wait a minute, God's my partner. It's another thing to write it down, this sort of contract, if you will, and have your pastor sign as the representative. I've never heard it before. And, one of the hosts of this, as we were talking earlier, of this podcast, is Alan Barnhart, who, they set their salary low right out of college and then sort of promised to give the rest away, but didn't paper it until later. I like that you've sort of papered it early, to sort of represent to yourself, not even to the public. And I know you've made that
Right.
clear, really to yourself in your own walk, that God's my partner. So you just got to give us a minute on, okay, if it was a success, now what would that look like? Is that, that you think you'll give a certain
Anything.
percentage away? That's to be determined. How do you think about that?
Yeah. So, I mean, oh goodness, this is very embarrassing, because imagine, if you're expected to try to write down a contract with God, what are you going to do? I have no idea. So, I
Right,
mean,
right.
like,
No lawyer's
I
gonna put
mean,
it down anyway, probably. Yeah.
yeah. So I'm just, and all the disclaimers in the world, whatever I've done, I'm wrong. It's not enough. But, I sat down to say, hey, listen, okay, we're 50-50 partners.
Okay.
And that's it, that I plan on 50 cents on the dollar of anything that I keep. It's going, charitable efforts,
Love it.
to help those in need, and to honor God. And I also added in there, look, this could be modified. Maybe that's not enough. I don't know. I
Right,
was
right,
just
right, right.
starting off.
Well, just for the listener, and maybe even for you to research, Stanley Tam is a guy
Okay.
who did this many, many years ago, and he forced his lawyer to have a contract where God was the counterparty. So
Oh,
you need
wow.
to look that up. But
Okay.
you're in good company. Stanley was an amazing, amazing man, and in the Midwest. But anyway, I just love that idea of documenting it.
Yeah.
I just love it, and so I just love that part of your journey. And I know we're running out of time here, and that was just such a great tip right there. But as we try to wrap up here, David, we always try to ask, just one question for somebody behind you on the journey. There's so many good little gems you've given us, but if somebody's just saying, wow, that's a big arc of a story, I don't know where to get started. If somebody just wants to start thinking about how to use their platform in a God honoring way, what would be a practical tip you'd leave with them?
So, I mean, obviously prayer, but I'm gonna go further, and I'm gonna say, wherever you are normally, get out of that place and go to someplace remote,
Mhm.
away from everyone else, away from the city. Go, take a weekend trip and escape and go to the country. Wherever you are, just go somewhere, and just, be in nature, and just try to be quiet and be still. And I know these are quotes from the Bible. I'm not trying to do that. I'm just telling you, I found that to be incredibly powerful for me, to be able to center myself and understand, what's important, and what's my North Star, and where do I need to go, and how do I do it. And then I always take back a little piece of that when I come back, and I'm back in my home or my neighborhood, and I'm walking around, and even just catching, like the leaves, like moving from like a breeze. It sounds silly, but it's almost like, kind of like this reminder of, like, hey, God's here, everything's gonna be okay. So I would say search inside first, and then, after that, you just take one step, whatever you can identify to be, that first step, take it. And then when you wake up the next day, you know, find something else and take a second step. So I would say that with that, that's kind of,
Mm. I
that's
think
the
that
hardest, because you're gonna find, like I can't even begin to tell you, the challenges that have been involved with this, as recently as 7 days ago. Like, I'm not out of the woods, far
right,
from it,
right.
far from it. So this has been an exercise, in humbly I say this, in faith, and trying to walk a faithful journey. And there is no easy answer. All I can say is you got to dig deep, and turn it over to God, and each day find one thing that you can count on, and it takes you to the next day.
I love that idea. Yeah, I just finished reading The Radical Elimination of Hurry by John Comer, and he just talks in there all the time about, look at Jesus as a model. I mean, nobody had a more important job for 3 years on this planet,
Right.
and he took time. Everybody was chasing him, but he took time to go into the wilderness to have quiet time to get clarity and strength. And so I think getting that clarity and strength, and then just frankly obeying one step at a time, and then adjusting along the way. Just for me to pull that one in, I love the that model also of just being willing to adjust and keep asking him, and wake up and take instructions and pivot as necessary. So
and don't stop questioning. Don't stop questioning yourself and critiquing yourself. I never once have believed that I have the answers. I never even once believed unquestionably that am I going this the wrong way? So I've always critiqued myself hard to try to figure out and pray. So that's not an easy answer, but it's a truthful one. And in terms of you need to be your hardest critic, and you can't be afraid about making adjustments when you feel like you need to.
Well, you haven't chosen an easy project for yourself, but just like every time I talk to you, your humility, I think, really rings true. And if anybody can pull it off with God's help, it's you. So we're rooting for you, and thank you just so much for sharing your story and your wisdom on the podcast today.
Well, Jeff, thanks for having me here. Honestly, it's always a pleasure visiting with you. And look, I did this because my only hope is if you can maybe help one person. I think that God speaks to us through our friends, through our family, and through strangers in the street. And so maybe I'm just trying to share what little bit I have, and hopefully inspire others.
Hey, amen, brother. That's exactly why we're doing this. And with that, thanks everybody for listening. Share this podcast with a friend. Give us your ratings and reviews. Check out our website, generousbusinessowner.com, and we'll see you next week. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks for listening to the Generous Business Owner Podcast with Jeff Thomas, Alan Barnhart, and Jeff Rutt. Make sure to follow the podcast so you don't miss an episode. You can find the guest contact information in the show notes. Stay tuned for the next episode.